Welcome to podcast number 4. Today it is just me. Bit of a different format today. As we approach RRC 100, I just wanted to kind of talk about what RRC has been and how it's progressed from the very beginning to what it is now. This fairly big, fairly well-known little row racing league in the corner of the middle of nowhere. Now, I'll go from the very beginning and go through what the original league was like with RRC, what we call Season 0. And that was a league run by Captain, who has since gone on to run HRO, which most people who have been around for a while will know of. And it was a pretty terrible league, to be honest. It was poor quality, the cars were poor, they were free model, everywhere you went you crashed, unstable, the tracks were poor. Overall poor league, and it didn't make it very far. It went to about round 7 or so before it ended and imploded on itself. Lots of arguments, lots of disorganisation, lots of problems. Now, that was around the middle of 2017, to which after Captain went on to run HRO, a little more successfully, but still some problems went on, and overall things just didn't go great. Going on to around the end of 2017, I'd begun having some ideas that I wanted to run a league of my own. I enjoyed racing. The bits I had done, I hadn't done much at that point actually. I'd done OHR, I'd done RRC, the original RRC. I had done HRO and a couple other bits here and there. But really I hadn't done much. I just knew I wanted to run something. And Captain still had the original group, the RRC group that we now use. So I was just simply asked him, hey, could I nab the group off you? He didn't want to give it away for free, so we discussed the price, and I gave him that price. It was like 80 Robux or something, which is, well, at the time was far less than a group cost. And that was all good, that was perfectly fine, and I now had this group. But I still needed to plan the group, and organise what we were doing, what I wanted to do, what I wanted the league to be. I'd always had the idea in my head that I wanted it to be era based. I knew that we were going to start in 2016, around that point, because that was obviously the year we were in at the time. The 17 cars hadn't been released yet. The 17 cars were released pretty much as we got going on the official season. You know, obviously they're released around March time, and February-March time. So we started in 2016, and then obviously in future 2017. And then I had this idea that we'd do votes based off of eras, and that would be that. I also had a few other ideas. You know, I wanted driver contracts. You know, a driver could be in their team for 2 seasons, 3 seasons. But that quickly came to realise after a couple of rounds in the actual season that it wasn't really realistic to do that. I didn't know how long the league would even run, so to hold a driver to a contract for 2 or 3 seasons was just unrealistic, frankly. And that was that really. I picked up this dead league and made it my own. I sort of touted around various leagues, OHR, HRO, like, hey, I'm running a league, do you want to take part? And a couple of people I already got to know, like Panda, like, unfortunately, Ernest. He's a bit of a pain in the ass nowadays, but he was okay back then. When he had a bit of a less of a reputation, he was a bit better. And then there were a couple of people like Tail who just sort of stumbled across the league. I think he was told by someone else that there was a new league starting up, and he got involved and interested. And from there we kind of began gathering a group of people to start this league up, to start really getting something going. I kind of wanted to get everything prepared first and then begin actually developing the league itself. I got a couple tracks built, I got the cars built, I got the rulebook done, the spreadsheet, etc, 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 before I even started getting people in. Once we got people in, I then started building everything else and kind of went from there. And it was a big learning experience. Season 1 all the way to really Season 3, Season 4, all looked kind of the same, kind of a bit inefficient, a bit poor. The cars weren't great, the tracks weren't great, but it was a learning process. I hadn't ever used Studio basically before I ran RRC. I'd messed around with it a couple of times with mates, with Tom, but I'd never seriously used it. So the Season 1 cars were my first real proper crack at a car. I'd built one with Venturion ages ago, but again, it wasn't really serious, and I hadn't learned anything from it really. Season 1 was different. I had to crack down, I had to get my head down and actually figure out what I was doing if this was to go anywhere. So Season 1 started out pretty basic, very basic. I said to myself that I'm not doing elevation in Season 1. I'm just going to build the tracks basically, which did mean we had a flat spar, which is a bit of a travesty. Bahrain was very short, Kota was ridiculously short. We ran it for Season 2, and the lap times were getting down into the 30 seconds. It was way too short. We ran Canada, which was given to me by Command originally, but I modified it so heavily it basically wasn't a Command track anymore. And we went from there really. The racing was okay, it was nothing special. The first 3 races were ran Collide, and obviously we ran into problems. The physics were even less stable then than they are now, and glitches happened, people went in the floor. Once we'd had enough of those to realise, okay, something needs to change here, we went to the system we still use to this day, which is non-colliding the cars and just having the wheels as collide. And that worked, very well. It stopped the glitches, it made the racing better and easier, and overall just improved the product, if you will. But it was a learning experience, certainly. Like leagues now, like IGL, I had to learn spotting, because I knew that if I was running a league like this, you needed things like spotting, because people wouldn't race properly otherwise. They would just cut you off, they would just hit you, even more so than now. But with a little bit of guidance that can be prevented, and it worked reasonably well. But the league was okay, the racing was okay. We had a couple of exceptional races. We had Brazil, comes to mind. It was our best attended race with 11 people, and it was our best race for battles. We had Tom and True, a Sauber fending off I think it was a Ferrari. We had Sev winning the race. We had Tail doing this normal thing of second place, and it was a good race. It was sort of the first race you can acknowledge as being, hey, that was a good race. The first 6 were a bit okay, nothing really happened. Coming into the first race was certainly an experience. Pre-season testing, we didn't even have a pit limiter. It wasn't until I was told about the fact that the cars I was using literally had a pit limit script in them. It was like, hey, these cars have a pit limit script in them, you just need to do pit 1 and pit 2. And I was like, oh, really? Okay then. We were still using the basic 1, 2, 3, or 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go, go, go buttons for the pits, and it was all very basic. I knew nothing. Without a few people helping out like Panda, I just knew nothing. It wasn't until they helped me out a little bit that I began to actually learn about the bits and bobs of Studio and what could be done and whatnot. And Season 1 and it sort of ended there, and we progressed into Season 2, which was sort of much of the same, but with improvements here and there. The cars were a bit better, not much better. The tracks were better, not much better, but a bit better. However, I started attempting things at elevation, which at tracks like Bahrain really, really didn't go very well. Bahrain was very rough, very dodgy, and frankly just not really good enough for what we needed. We still ran the old Kota, which was too short for how fast the cars were. We ran a Monaco, which for the time was pretty good for my building standards, but again nowadays wouldn't be good enough. We had a free model Italy because I got a bit bent over by Marlowe. But it was progression. It was learning. It was a continuation from where I started. The cars were too quick. I made the cars too fast. Some people enjoyed them a lot, but objectively they were too fast and too twitchy and could kill you if you so much as looked at them wrong. And that was not what I wanted. But for Season 2 and 3 it was all I really knew until I learned more. They were also not very competitive. Season 2 was mainly Marlowe and Tail for the majority of it. You had Ernest win a couple of races, you had Triple on the podium a few times, you had Hell take a few second places, but on the most part, it was Marlowe and Tail, with Marlowe running off into the distance, Tail picking up the pieces. And Season 3 was much of the same, except from even more so. Marlowe would take wins, Tail would pick up the pieces, and then Polska was sort of there or thereabouts, taking 3 wins, but really wasn't fully there. Season 2 brought a couple of pretty infamous moments though. We had the Baku incident, which involved Eden Laurent overtaking the whole field under the safety car, getting disqualified, and shortly after, because he's Eden Laurent banned from the Discord for a couple seasons, until I let him back in for Season 4, and then Season 3 had the good old he pressed my push to pass, which was a very, very recurrent feature of Season 3. Push to pass was a bit of a dodgy one. It was fun, a lot of people enjoyed it, but it could have been done a lot better overall, in the fact that it just wasn't done well. It was inefficient, poorly scripted, because I scripted it, and overall it was just very, very bad. It should have been done better, but it wasn't. And that was partly my fault because I didn't look for other people. I can't remember if I fully scripted it or if I got someone to script a bit of it and then I did the rest. But yeah, it was poor. It was a poor system. I can't remember how it came about. It worked, just not well enough. And you had lots of incidents of someone would be an idiot and just go, oh hey, I'm going to press his button. They pressed it, and then the person would later realise that one of their PTPs was used up and would rightly complain. But it created a lot of stress and a lot of problems because it got to the stage where we were like, okay, we need to hold a meeting for this to figure out whether we keep the system in or whether we get rid of it. In the end, we kept it in, but it was very much it's staying in for this race, but it's going after. We are not keeping it for future races. future seasons because it's just too problematic. And that was a good decision because it definitely needed improving. Season 3 was, again, another improvement. We kept the cars the same, the 2017 spec cars. They remained the same because there was no reason to change them. I didn't really want to build another set of cars. We were going to run 3 seasons, and these were the 3 seasons for the era, going along with my era plan. Overall, yeah, it was better. However, there were still problems. For that season, we had a few more elevated tracks. We had Spain introduced, which, again, was okay, but not good enough for modern standards. It needed a lot of revising and changing and editing to be reused when it was reused in Season 6, and I think Season 7 or 8. We had an Austria, which again was not bad for the time, but nowadays it could probably be a lot better. Belgium was built, which is one of the few tracks that has held up to times. It wasn't bad at all, and I think it was my best track of the time. Since then, I've built better, but for the it's one of the few tracks that I think have held up. Then we got to tracks like China, which is one of those tracks that haunts me to this day. It was appalling because I could never get turn 1 and 2 elevation right. So it turned into this bumpy mess that I gave up on and just said, fuck it, we're running this. And we did. To a lot of people's dismay. Few people could get it right. The only people who really learnt it were Marlow and Scouser. So that day we saw Scouser come home with a P2, which those who know Scouser know that isn't a common occurrence. That's not something you see often, and to be fair, he did well that race. He was the only one of the few who learnt the track, and it was good. That race had a few other incidents as well. We had Knight have to go AFK to eat his dinner, which was quite amusing. And then you had Phil, I think, who came 3rd as well, so he had a good result for Manor overall. And yeah, China wasn't a positive one. USA got rebuilt with proper elevation for Season 3, and that wasn't bad. It wasn't great, the elevation was too extreme, but it was progress in the right direction. And it was learning. I made progress in how I approached studio, how I approached building in my league. We also had Japan, which again is another circuit that's held up. It looks outdated now, but it works and functions as well as it should. Overall, I think it was an enjoyable season. It was better. We had more drivers, more attendance, more consistent attendance. We had around an average of 10 or 11 a race, as opposed to 8 that we started off with in Season 1. So it was a step in the right direction. But it still looked like the original RRC did. You could still see where the league came from, which is kind of what I didn't want, was for the league to still look, well, poor. And that was where things began to rapidly change. Season 4, we had our era change. And the eras was 1990 to 1992. To get to here, we had a big series of votes. There were numerous votes, and it was looking like there were 3 eras that were winning out. You had 1999 to 2001, you had 2011 to 13, and you had 1990 to 1992. However, in the last couple of votes, 1990 began to really stretch a lead out and become a lot more popular. Originally, 2011 was the favoured season, but people began to change their minds, and in the last vote, 1990 to 92 won out by something like 4 or 5 votes. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough. The season also saw new records. we had a record 24 drivers attend qualifying in round 1 at Belgium, of which 4 could not qualify, and only 20 would start the race. That race itself was the reason for the introduction of the 20 grid limit rule. As a result, 4 didn't qualify, 19 people finished the race with a stab DNFing. It also saw new title protagonists, in the fact that Marlowe had gone to Dallara, and Tail was struggling a little bit for competitiveness. So that season saw the rise of both Morjat and Knight. Knight, who was a fairly new driver, he debuted in Season 2 for, I believe, Mercedes, and then went over to... no, he debuted for Haas, my apologies, and then he went over to Mercedes for Season 3. But he was around the midfield back point of the grid, got a 4th place at the end of Season 2, and in Season 3 him and Grand were in Mercedes, getting around back mid positions in the season. But for Season 4, things sort of aligned. Knight got into a competitive seat and a competitive position, and ended up winning the title by 6 points over Morjat, who himself had been in championship contention in Season 1, and came 2nd in that season, and then once again finished runner-up in Season 4. The cars themselves were massive improvements. They looked better, they drove better, they were more appropriately paced. Instead of going, 40-second lap times, they were like a minute. They were significantly slower than before, which was a positive. That's the direction I wanted to go. There were less issues, the tracks once again got better. However, Season 4, the tracks also got simpler. Due to the rising in attendance, there was more cars on track, which meant a bit more lag. And at the time, Roblox hadn't quite sorted slowdown lag. So tracks were made intentionally very simple. And that was both good and bad. You can see from some of my old tracks like Paul Ricard and the original San Marino how simple they were. In a way, they were too simple. They were essentially layouts bordered off. There was nothing special to them, they all looked fairly similar. But it worked, it's what we needed to do at the time, and people enjoyed it. It was a reasonably good season. It wasn't standout, there weren't any... There were good races, but there was nothing that sticks out in the mind. Australia, Brazil were always good races. Britain was one, however, that we don't really talk about, although I am here. It was our first race with the torrential weather. In Season 4, the weather types were dry, damp, intermediate, heavy, torrential and extreme, reserved for monsoon-like countries, so Japan, etc. We had torrential in Britain. It was the first time we'd ever had anything close to it, and it was a nightmare. Not only were the drivers struggling with the conditions, we had people like Knight lagging, Phantom causing some pile-ups, and Pizza causing some issues as well. And the race overall was very poor, and probably classified as one of the worst we've ever had, if not the worst of all time in RRC's history to date. And that was unfortunate, because the rest of the season was a very good progression. I'd begun learning more, I'd learned how to build better, the cars were looking better. We had some races like Japan, where we had a life finishing the race, which was awesome and funny because of their real life reputation. And it was an enjoyable season. We saw a lot of new faces join, and we saw some leave as well. We'd seen the likes of Drac take part full-time in a season. We saw G-Man join in, Lego join in. Eden Laurent returned, but would do the first 4 races and then bugger off again. we saw Stig return full time again, and he would later become a very prolific driver as well within RRC. And it's definitely one of those, not really light at the end of the tunnel because we weren't in a tunnel, but certainly you could see in the distance that good things were to come for us as a league. Moving on to Season 5, and once again, things changed around a bit. There were even more title contenders. We saw new records broken with race winners. Season 5 holds the record for the most race winners in a season, of, I believe it was 7 race winners that season, which, when you consider we have 12 races in a season, to have 7 is amazing. And we saw Stig come to the front, which I sort of said in Season 4, Stig looks like he could be a real dark horse coming into Season 5, and he very much was. He started out the season a bit shaky, got a 6th place and a 4th place in the first couple of in round 2 and 3, with a couple of podiums sandwiched in between, but he got on a pretty good streak of results and really charged forward. His main championship protagonist there, it was a bit of an odd one, really. He didn't have one rival that season. It was a bit of a shaky season for a lot of people, whether that's due to attendance or just simply due to pace. At the start of the season, it was Lego who got off to a really, really good start by winning the first 2 races of the season. But Lego sort of tailed off with Knight being in the frame as well, up until around round 5 or so, after he started struggling to attend and had some poor performances, etc. You also had Marlow in the frame, who had returned to Tyrrell for a few races. He started off in the Dallara, but returned to Tyrrell for round 4 onwards. And he started off in very, very strong form, getting a couple wins and a couple podiums. However, he very suddenly stopped and quit, which left Stig, who was the closest rival to Marlow at the time, who in fact was leading the title in round 7 by a couple points. It leaves Stig in a very comfortable position. He had a massive lead to 3rd place, who at the time was around 10 points behind or so, which was Knight at the time, and was fairly comfortably able to walk away with it, getting late season wins in round 10 and 11, which really secured his season. It was looking like he was going to have a season of a winless championship in some ways, was how consistent he was. But he ended up getting a couple of wins and sealed the title around early. Season 5 wasn't without its controversy. We had an incident with Morjat using an alt account, in which he started the season off under an alt account called II Robertson, who I had actually seen previously used in Ernest's old Reef, no, not us, Sevsley, his old football league that he used to have. It had been around there, and I'd seen it a couple of times. I never really connected it as an alt to Morjat, but other people did, and he was found out around round 10 after Polska told me about it all, and received a race ban for the rest of the season, which sort of sealed any title hopes for him. Looking back on it, if you extrapolate and whatnot, he was looking good for around 2nd place in the title. He'd already suffered a race ban in round 1 due to some off-track excursions with an F1 season we were doing together, where he decided to turn into a massive velociraptor and was a bit pissy and got a race ban as a result of it, for just being a bit of a pain in the ass. So that kind of put paid to Morjant's title hopes. Knight's title hopes were put paid to a late season, I think, parent problem. He also had a very, very poor round 6, which very much put him back in the title. As a result of that race, he lost around 6 or so points to Stig. In fact, he lost 8 points to Stig, and a good chunk to Marlowe. Obviously, Marlowe retired, so that ended his championship. So Stig was sort of fairly easily able to run away with it all. That season saw a bunch of new drivers come in as well. We saw Drac beginning to get competitive with his awesome win at Mexico. Yes, he was helped out by Marlowe being a bus, but to see him suddenly come to the forefront and win a race was awesome. That was over 50% of his points for the season, and we wouldn't see him truly get competitive until round 1 of next season, but it was a good moment, especially as he qualified around 7th on the grid, so came back from a long way back. We saw Sam come in properly. He'd come in around season 4, I believe, but was definitely a consistent person on the grid at this point. We saw Stephen arrive on the grid. Antoine arrived on the grid. Good Sammy arrived. Lots of good drivers, lots of not so good drivers. But the grid got bigger and livelier. Attendance was excellent throughout the season. And once again, it was this upwards trajectory that I'd aimed for since the very start of RRC. In terms of getting better consistently, but not pushing things too hard, not trying to get better too quickly. The cars looked much nicer. Arguably, you could say that this is what the current RRC was. Season 5 to now is like the second half of it all, when you could actually recognise this is where things were properly good. The tracks were much better. Things were improving. The various tracks we were using, I'd begun sprucing up and making a bit more detailed and a bit nicer. The racing was better. We had some awesome races that season. We had Mexico was obviously a very, very good race. I believe Japan was, Australia was, Germany I think was. We had lots and lots of excellent racing, and it was good fun. I enjoyed running the season. It was, at the time, probably my favourite season that I had run. Obviously, it was the last season we'd done, so understandably, but to this day I think it still ranks in the top 3 that we've done, probably second. At this point, I felt like we'd begun to really solidify a reputation as a league. My aim really was to try and match OHR in terms of how many seasons that had done. I felt like that was a good point for the league. If we got there, then we were doing really good. Obviously now we're in season 9, so we've blitzed it. We've far surpassed it, and we've been going consistently as a league, and it's been very, very successful. Season 6 would once again be a step in that same direction. There are a couple of dips. Attendance was a little worse. I think we had about 13 or 14 a race instead of like 15 or 16. But it was still pretty good. And that season we saw a properly good title fight. You had Stig and Steven going at it for the whole season. Initially, Knight took a very good lead in the championship, had a very, very good start to the season. He had built a massive lead by round 3. But once again, problems hit him. He had a couple of DNFs. He had a couple of mediocre races and then had to miss 3 races at the end of the season. Whereas Steven and Stig were pretty much constantly around each other from the very start of the season. Round 6, Stig just about led. And then you go up to around round 9, and they were tied. Round 10, Stephen led. 11, Stig led. And then we got to the finale, which was amazing. Neither of them had qualified particularly great. They were both around, I think, 5th or 6th. So they both had work to do. Stephen had qualified in 6th place and Stig was 4th that race. For Stig to win, all he had to do was not lose to Stephen in terms of points. If he tied or was ahead, he won, no matter what. However, if Stephen tied, he lost, so Stephen had to beat Stig, no matter what. The points gap coming into the race was that Stig led by 3 points, which meant if Stephen won, Stig had to finish second. If Stephen was second, Stig had to finish 4th. What ended up happening was Stephen ended up finishing 3rd on the podium, but Stig finished in 6th, which was perfectly enough to take the title, based on countback. Stig had won 3 races, Stephen had won 2. And it was just a great season. Up until then, we had never had a season that had even gone to the last race, let alone gone this close. There were moments in the race which easily lost Stephen the title. There were moments in the race that Stig could have lost the title. The championship was essentially changing throughout the whole race. At points Stephen led it, at points Stig led it. There were other moments in the season as well. We had Lego trying to force Stephen through for position in the round prior in Japan, which was very much frowned upon as there was a massive championship battle going on. And had Stephen let Lego go through and had Stephen kept the position, he would have taken that title. He would have been the Season 6 champion. So in a way, doing that was a ridiculously honourable thing for him to do. Panda was involved in that race as well and forced Lego, or tried to force Lego through, I believe, but things went wrong. I'm not sure if that was quite the case. I know there were other instances in the race where Panda let Stephen back through. I think that's more what I'm referring to. So ignore that one. That was a balls up no. Panda benefited from that, from the last lap or the second last lap shenanigans. And it was a truly good season. We saw the debut of Catch. I swear I'm not 9. I swear I'm not 9. We saw Lego getting disqualified for speeding into the pits at 230. We saw Drac beginning to show what a good driver he had become. You know, in seasons previous, he had been known for being slow. But over the course of season 5 and 6, he began really finding his pace. He started off the season a bit weak. He was driving for footwork at the start of the season, and he was in the points, but close to not being in them. Round 4 to 6, he then was getting 5ths and 4ths, and then round 7 and 8, he was on the podium, 2nd, 3rd, 6th, 4th, and then 2 podiums to end the season off. When the season ended, he was only 7 points off the title, which was ridiculous. You know, this was an insanely competitive season, and it was great to see that the league was growing in such a way. Once again, the cars looked better, they drove better. The Season 5 cars had a massive snapback problem, where when you launched them out of the corner, they'd try and correct when you were still turning, so you'd kind of get this juddering problem. The Season 6 cars didn't have that. They were much smoother to drive. Much more nicer, much more pliable. And I hope people enjoyed that more than what Season 5 was. Then you have the story of Morjat's season, who ended up finishing 3rd in the title. He was in the March Ilmore, which was a fairly low car to begin with in the season. It was around 7th on the grid, and off the pace, certainly, he wasn't contending at the start of that season. However, due to some very, very good performances, he brought that car from 7 SPS off the top all the way up to the top, a front-running car. By the end of the season, it was only 1 SPS off the top. He missed round 1, but in round 2 he got a podium. Then he got a 5th, 4th, 7th podium. He missed round 7 and then started winning. He won 2 races that season. March themselves finished 3rd in the Constructors, which was about as good as he'd have got. He was mostly on his own for that season, with a few people here and there contributing a couple of points. Season 6 was going to be pretty hard to beat. And it wasn't really beaten by Season 7. Season 6 was just such a fabulous season to be with, to be a part of, to run. We also had the Season 7 endurance race, which was good fun to run and organise. We had the Nissan GTR LM and we had the Mercedes AMG GTR for that, and that was good fun. There were a lot of retirements, but again, it was something novel, something new. And at this point, RRC was essentially what it is now. I'm very, very proud of what has been created for this league, with what I've done, and again, I hope that everyone who has taken part at some point has enjoyed what they've done. Whether it's been in a race situation or whether it's just been within the Discord, or I hope that at some point you have enjoyed it. Going into Season 7, and once again things were looking a little different. There were still some fairly similar protagonists within the season. In terms of, you had Lego in contention towards the start. Morjat was ever present. However, things were different in the sense that you had people like Drak in very much the title fight, and it ended up being that Drak was the winner. He was the Season 7 champion, which I'm sure a lot of people would not have expected when the season started. Morjat led the majority of the season up until round 6, and began tailing off at the end of the season as Drak's form very much came on. During that season, Drak did not finish outside the top 4. He only finished outside the top 3 twice in the races he participated in. He missed round 12 due to securing the season early, but it didn't even matter. It was a very strong season, and for Toyota as a whole, it was very strong. They took the points record for the points from Season 4 to 7. Obviously, Season 1 to 3 were different systems, so it couldn't be beaten. Season 7 was also the beginning of the 3rd era, which we are now in the last season of, 2005 to 7. So we had a reduction in teams from 16 down to 10 teams, which wasn't really a problem in the end, but it did see a reduction in the number of seats available. There were a couple of people who were left to reserve. You had also people like Tom begin to come into the limelight. Toodles was debuting that season and had a very, very good season, taking a debut win in round 12, 9 rounds into his RRC racing period, and obviously is still doing reasonably well now. Tom took a race win and a secondary podium at the end of the season, and although he wasn't in title contention, he certainly proved his worth as a driver. We all know he's a very, very good driver, and he proved that by finishing 7th in the standings after participating in really only about 7 races. He had a couple of DNFs, which I believe were due to connection issues and things, so it's a bit hard to count those. That season we had 7 race winners again. Again, another competitive season, although the season was mostly between Morjat and Drac, with Lego taking 3 wins, but not really having a consistent enough season to fully challenge for the title. Season 7 was also where I began to obviously rebuild a lot of tracks and build a lot of tracks. We saw the introduction of Turkey, the introduction of Sweden, Nürburgring, the new Hockenheim. We saw San Marino vastly edited. Spain was very much changed. Indianapolis was introduced. Lots of new tracks. Australia was rebuilt and introduced. Lots of new tracks and much better quality tracks. Season 4 to 6 ran mostly off of fairly old circuits, with some improvements here and there, but it was Season 7 that we once again saw a big jump up in quality. And it was very, very enjoyable as a season. And that brings us a bit closer to the present day. Season 8. Obviously the season that's just passed, it's only been about 2 months since it ended. The season itself was a bit anticlimactic in the end. There wasn't as much of a title battle as there was in Season 6, Season 5, to an extent Season 7. Initially Drac looked strong to take a second title and defend the crown, but he tapered off pretty quickly. And Morjat, who had a pretty poor start to the season compared to a lot of drivers, only taking 1 podium in the first 3 rounds, which was the 3rd place, very quickly climbed up the table and took the championship lead by round 6 over Drac. And after round 6, it was fairly plain sailing for Morjat. The gaps in the championship didn't really come down majorly. With Tom having very, very good form, but essentially mirroring Morjat in a lot of respects, in the fact that Morjat would have a good result, Tom would have a good result, but neither really changed in gap. The only period it changed was Morjat DNF'd the last race of the season, and Tom took the win, so obviously that's a massive point close, but Morjat had already secured the title, so it didn't matter what he did. And it was a pretty good story, because this is someone who has been racing in RRC since Season 1, alongside Tail, alongside Phantom and Stig and whatnot. But the difference is he's consistently raced since Season 1, which only really Tail and him have done. Phantom has taken breaks, Stig has taken big breaks. And in Season 1 he finished 2nd. Season 4 he finished 2nd. Season 5 he would probably have finished 2nd without the disqualification. Season 6 he finished 3rd. Season 7 he finished 2nd, So this is someone who's finished 2nd in the championships 3 times in a row, 3rd once, and potentially a 2nd for a 4th time. So for him to finally get the title it must have been very satisfying for him, and it was very nice to see from my perspective as well. Obviously seeing Tom come very close was disappointing for him, but I think Tom had already figured out that it probably wasn't really happening after round 10, where he had a pretty calamitous Britain, got dumped at the start and had to recover all the way up to 3rd, which was a pretty mighty effort considering where he had been off the start, essentially spending the first 5 laps in a wall or inside of someone. So for him to come as close as he did was excellent and very, very good to see. Season 8 in itself was once again a progression season. I'd begun to learn that my old way of doing liveries was a bit basic and I should maybe step it up a bit, so I'd begun applying decals here and there, extra bits of detail to make the cars look a bit better, and they did look better. And they were the first cars since the physics change. So that meant the cars could really be actually developed around the physics change, around the issues that were in the new physics and the good things that were in the new physics. The fact that you could use more torque and they were a little less buggy than previously. There were issues though. You had to have a minimum amount of torque essentially, or they wouldn't turn at all, which wasn't really a problem with the prior PGS physics. And for Season 7 it was a bit of a problem because the cars had to have something like 5 or 6 extra torque, which is like 50% more than what they had before, to make them work. So they handled very, very weirdly. They were okay, they were drivable, but there are a lot of people who very much preferred them before. So modelling the Season 8 cars was a challenge. New physics to get used to, and just new systems and a lot of testing to get them right. They weren't perfect. They had issues on the grass, and if you touched gravel you were basically doomed unless you got it under control. If you try to just slide across it, you'd probably spin out and lose a lot of time. Season 8 didn't see many changes in terms of calendar. It saw the introduction of Canada again onto the calendar, which we hadn't seen for a couple of seasons. But overall we didn't see many changes. I made updates to certain tracks like Japan, updates to San Marino again, updates to Britain, generally making circuits look better and trying to make everything more presentable and both form and function. And that essentially brings an end to what is a recap for RRC over the period of time. It's been very fun to run. I thank everyone who's helped me. I thank everyone who's taken part. If people didn't take part, it wouldn't be possible to run what this has been. Hopefully this doesn't come across as rambly as a podcast. I came up with a few ideas for what to talk about, but nothing scripted, so this is all just coming from my mind right now. But certainly Panda, Tom, Tail, I think you guys have done an amazing job to help me out and participate. Obviously there are other people as well, but these guys have been here from the very start and I appreciate their help and I appreciate everyone else who's stuck around as well. We've still got a couple months to go until we see RRC 100, but I wanted to make this a couple months early because I had various bits and bobs on my mind that I don't think I'd be able to put out as well then as I do now, and like Formula 1 does in real life, they really hyped it up all the way. So I think putting this out early will be good, and we haven't seen a podcast for a long time, so this is the perfect time for it to happen. The future of RRC, well, certainly I don't plan on ending this anytime soon. Season 10 to 12 is 2014 to 16, and some of you have already seen the cars for it. I'm certainly very excited for it, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. The push-to-pass system I'm planning on keeping with a few updates here and there. Thanks to CC's brilliant help, he's been awesome during this. I have no clue how to script, so people like CC are pretty vital when it comes to ideas like this. I was chatting today, there have been thoughts about maybe implementing some sort of endurance series alongside the main RRC F1 series for the future, but there is still a lot of teething things to get around, like time slots and planning it all out, so that'll be a few months in the future, but certainly the future looks good, certainly not bad. Season 9 in itself, well, that's looking very good so far. It's been a good season, although the podium hasn't changed, so we'll see if it does going along the season. Hopefully we'll see a good title fight and not see Tom run into the distance, but that we will find out. We'll see if more Jack or Drac can step up to it, or maybe even Tail can find extra speed and step up to the plate. Anyway, thank you for listening to the podcast. Number 4. That's the first one in a few months. Hope you enjoyed listening, and goodbye.